Good evening. Welcome once again to another episode of Commander's Gridiron. I'm your host, Steve Lockman, where we talk all things on the field, off the field, Washington Commanders. And even though the season is done for us and the big Super Bowl is upon us, only a few days away, that doesn't mean we don't have anything to talk about here in DC or about our beloved Commanders. A lot has happened over the last couple of days, actually, even the last week, and even furthermore in the last hour, right? I even got some breaking news to give to us for those of you that don't follow along. So we'll touch on that subject later on in our show. Speaking of our show, for those of you returners or newies to the program, you can see what we're going to be talking about at the bottom of your screen. Topics for tonight. We'll scroll across the bottom in order there, so you can feel free to chime in. Speaking of chiming in, use that comment bar at the bottom of whatever platform you're watching us on, whether it's YouTube, Twitter/X, or Facebook. Use that comment bar. Give us a question. Give us a like. Give us some trash talk. Give us some banner. Give us a comment about your team, our team, what's going on with my team, and we'll have a lot of fun as we go about the show tonight. So, speaking of the show, as you know, with this platform that we run every week, we like to start the show with some off the field news. And look, even though the season is concluded, we're going to do a season in review show tonight. So there's going to be a lot of stuff on the field, talk topics, so to speak, coming up later tonight. We always start with a couple things off the field, right? And even though there's a thing that down there at the bottom of your screen that says Josh Harris's presser, we got about 2 or 3 things to touch on super quick before we get to Josh Harris's presser that he did actually yesterday morning before all the Super Bowl media took place down in New Orleans. So the first big thing that came out over the last week, today's Tuesday, February 4th. Why is that any of significance? Today was the day that DC Mayor Bowser had to send an emergency resolution to DC Council to officially approve the land transfer from the legislative session that was approved and signed by the president into the hands of the DC Council. So today was that legislative session and expiration kind of all wrapped up into one. So obviously, once that's approved, the recorder of the deeds will publish it, and it's a done deal. RFK land and that complex of former federal parkland is now going to be back into the fold of the DC Council government. What's kind of good to note about that is that the RFK transfer to the district is for the next 99 years, would be complete today during the legislative session of the DC Council. That was put in by that emergency measure by Mayor Bowser. The memo states that council will still have to approve any necessary future development plans for that site. So it's not just a blank check and a la carte for any use or franchise in this case to go ahead and build anything they want, new stadium, hotels, restaurants, all that good stuff, shopping. All it does is just the land transfer back to the District of Columbia. So like I said, any further future development plans would still have to be approved by DC Council for that. But all in all, it's still progress, and it puts everybody at the table kind of on a level playing field to start the negotiation process with the Washington Commanders for a new stadium. The only other big thing that came out this week, and actually came out yesterday, for those of you that may remember this idiot, we'll call him that kind of loosely, right? That Baltimore Ravens fan who back in the middle of October, in the middle of October, assaulted a couple Commanders fans after the game, walking down the streets of Baltimore, had his court date today. And let's be honest, I guess it must be nice to have a dad who's attorney and, by the way, have a bunch of money. Because why? So he actually pled guilty to 3 counts of assault. Not sure if they were felonies or, actually judging by the sentence guidelines that were handed out, the punishment, I'm going to say they're misdemeanors. This guy, I don't even remember his name. He got social media publicity after the event happened, ended up losing his job, rightfully so, the whole 9 yards. He basically had his court hearing today for sentencing. As I said, pled guilty to those assault charges, got 5 years probation, 100 hours of community service, and about $5,000 to $6,000 in fines. Sounds pretty easy just for going out and assaulting a couple of opposing teams' fans when you're drunk and intoxicated after a football game on a Sunday night, right? But it kind of is what it is. So, hey, just got to run with it. So speaking of incidents technically on the field, for in this case, it was announced earlier since our last show last week. A couple fines came out for players of opposing teams. Why is this important? It's kind of important to a degree because AJ Brown was fined $11,255 for the uncalled face mask penalty versus Marshawn Lattimore in the NFC Championship game. There was also a fine levied against Eagles defensive tackle Jalen Carter for the hit against Tyler Biadasz to the head as well. Now, look, here's the deal. Should calls and plays like that be punished? Probably to some extent, right? We won't argue that. And in some cases, Commanders throughout the year already have been fined for calls. Roughing the passers, unnecessary roughness, hits out of bounds. I don't think we had one targeting call one targeting fine, I should say, that was lobbied by the NFL players, the safety division of player safety or whatever. The reason that this gets brought up, which is kind of magnified even more so after the fact, is the fact of a lot of these fines that are levied against plays that did not even have penalties called against them. So then the question becomes, why didn't they become penalties, or why wasn't the flag thrown? They obviously were seen on a field of play. Replay showed them numerous times, the whole 9 yards. So definitely a question for NFL officiating, of which, oh, by the way, Roger Goodell and company have had since the AFC Championship game. So, look, it's kind of a never-ending story, and until they get some truly meaningful progress in officiating, nothing's ever going to get right. Kind of know what I mean? Look, until they put some chips in the balls or figure out the technology to measure first downs, in that case, until they can better define replay assist to do quick guessing, it's only going to be what it is, and the human error factor is going to be a lot more than what it normally is, right? There's going to be a human factor involved, but you try to eliminate or reduce that as much as possible. Speaking of possible, something that we never thought was going to be possible until new ownership, new management, new coaching staff kind of takes over, right? Owner press conferences. Wow. What can we say? So it's kind of been day and night since the Dan Snyder era. And we know that. Look, we know what we ushered out. We know what we brought in. And it's kind of just overly refreshing to see the owner sitting at a table in Ashburn at the training complex and give an end of the season presser, even though it was only 26 minutes long, isn't going to answer the tough questions about the stadium, rightfully so, the whole 9 yards. But he did cover a lot of things, and a lot of things needed to be said. So as you see at the bottom of your screen, what did he talk about? He talked about the RFK Stadium. He kind of touched on somewhat of extent of funding, because reporters were trying to press and dig him for similarities, learning experiences, how he's going to use the project that's currently being developed and built in Philadelphia for the hockey team and basketball franchises that he can bring over here to this, and how that was done between public and private financing, the whole 9 yards, name changes, branding, you name it, right? So let's dive into what Josh Harris said, right? First and foremost, like I said, it was super nice and refreshing that he actually sat down with the media, took a little Q&A. He had like a 3 to 4 minute dialogue at the front, thanking everybody from AP all the way down to the cleaning staff for the tremendous year that we have, and the quick turnaround, and the awesome change in culture and coaching, and basically every aspect of, beginning to turn this into a winning franchise again. That's number one. Number two was the stadium. He wants to make whatever. So let's kind of go back real quick. Give the short version. The lease runs out for Northwest Stadium in Landover, the current home site of the Washington Commanders, in 2027. He said now that the land transfer went through today for DC, puts all jurisdictions, all three in the DMV, on a level playing field to leverage and create a good bidding process for a future site for the Washington Commanders. So somebody asked what he wants to look for in a new stadium. And he wants to build a stadium that, obviously isn't going to be over capacity like Dan Snyder was trying to do with the former FedEx field. He's actually going to try to make it hard for that opponent when they come in, as we kind of saw with the home field advantage and environment in Northwest Stadium this year, which kind of reflected by our winning record at home. Next, he wants to be responsible, has a sense of responsibility for the economic and impact and the creation of jobs in whatever area they end up picking. So what does that mean? Basically, he knows that, hey, look, wherever they go, Maryland, Virginia, or DC, there's going to be construction jobs. There's going to be jobs that come with the finished product of the stadium. Whether it's hotels, restaurants, shopping, residential, there's going to be even more jobs created as a result of the development immediately surrounding the new stadium, wherever that is. Real quick, hey, our good buddy Paul Spencer chimes in. Hey, what's up, Steve? Hey, Paul, thanks for checking in. Love to have people watching, chiming in, and going through. Our friend Michael Papernick says, hey, I'm a diehard Eagles fan. I'd like to congratulate your Commanders on their season. Awesome. Thank you. Good luck to your fellas in the green. You won't hear me say that very often. And the upcoming Super Bowl. We have a former Commander playing on the Super Bowl bound team for the Philadelphia Eagles. It'll definitely be an interesting game. A lot of narratives going into that big game on Sunday night. Whether you're Kansas City, Philadelphia Eagles, or just another NFL franchise fan. So it'll definitely be interesting to see what comes about at the end of the game after 60 minutes of played football on Sunday night. Back to the stadium talk. One of the things that was raised to Josh Harris was funding, right? And when they talked about funding, they asked for a timeline of the new stadium. And Josh Harris said, hey, look, there's a timeline and an expectation that, the field in the new stadium will be completed by 2030. And I don't think that's unrealistic, knowing that, hey, we're at 2025 now. So I think over the next year, you're going to see, that whole process go through of different jurisdictions putting their proposals forward of where they should build. And probably within the next year and a half, maybe, they'll have a site selected, and then they work through that process to start doing the permits and the design and all that good stuff to kind of see what's going on, right? Kind of makes sense. But so then basically you'd have to go on a year-to-year lease after 2027 expires with Northwest Stadium until the new stadium's complete, and then kind of figure out, what they're going to do. If they end up staying in Maryland, it's probably going to end up getting built right next to the current one, kind of like what Buffalo's doing right now. But I don't think that timeline is unreasonable, for what it is, right? Our friend Eileen checks in. Hey, Steve, long time no see. Hope everything is well. Thank you very much. It actually is. We had an awesome season this year with our Washington Commanders. I know your Giants didn't do the greatest, but there's always next season, right? To try and build that team through the draft, through free agency. You got some good pieces coming back. Hopefully some guys can stay healthy, get healed up from season-ending injuries, which seem to be one of the detriments as well. So I think they're one of the teams that's going to get it figured out. I mean, they got to try and get it figured out, right? And like I said, they got a lot of good pieces up there. They just got to figure out how to put that puzzle together and make it all work. We all know the debacle that took place on Hard Knocks with Saquon Barkley last offseason. Hopefully they don't have another one of those. But hey, anything can happen with any franchise, right? Oh, and actually Paul says, hey, it's even worse because Eileen is a Jets fan. Oh my goodness. I was giving you credit for the wrong New York team. Is it worse? Is it the same? Is it better that she's a Jets fan? I don't know. Yeah, we could take that in so many directions, right? I mean, on some levels, the Jets are better. And on some levels, they're not. The Jets owner is kind of on the same level as the Giants GM. So, kind of flip-floppy, right? But at least, Woody Johnson came up and at least admitted that he's a shitty owner, and, you can kind of move on and go from there. So, we'll see what happens, right? It's all good. All good. So back to Harris's presser. Probably the last two big things that he commented on was, we'll start with the team first, right? Even though I kind of have name and uniforms listed there, right? He's letting the people in charge do their jobs, which is so refreshing to hear. So great, that he's not their micromanager. He's like, look, unless there's and he actually said this in his press conference, that unless there's a super serious issue about something that he doesn't agree with for the betterment of the team, he's not going to step in to change course or the direction on that decision, which is obviously a complete 180 from the former owner, right? He's like, look, I have a lot of trust in AP to do what he does. I have a lot of trust in DQ to do what he does as well. So, it's all good that, he's not letting he's not going to micromanage. He's not getting involved. He's not going to, call draft day shots or free agent signings, decisions and stuff like that. He said he's always going to be learning. He is going to be asking questions. He's going to be trying to further educate himself a lot, but it's not to basically second guess or undermine the decisions of his staff. It's basically to educate him to make himself a better owner in the football world. So it's kind of really good to hear. The big one, he was asked, hey, look, there's been a lot of talk, a lot of conversation that, is there going to be a name change? Is there going to be a rebrand? And he literally came out and said, the Commanders mean something now in the building now. The culture that we've developed, the culture that we've created between the management, between the coaches, between the players, the whole 9 yards. So the name stays, but we will be bringing back the past to kind of tie into the present to further kind of cement the bridge between the past of the Washington Redskins and the current Washington Commanders. So with that being said, there's a lot of speculation and even some indirect formation from team management that is alluding, because they already came out and said there's going to be some kind of a uniform change. So first off, Commanders are staying, name's not changing. Is there going to be a rebrand? Not necessarily at all. Just tweaks to what there already is. So what's going to be really cool, because people have kind of taken this and run with it already, is the fact that there's going to be some uniform changes. And obviously the speculation is that they're going to go back to the uniforms of the Joe Gibbs 1.0 era, right? The beginning, like the 80s and the early mid 90s. So they're going to get rid of, the cheesy burgundy white uniforms that we have now, keep the all blacks as an alternate, and then, basically go back to the true burgundy and white ones that we had before, the helmets with the white and gold stripes on them, the stripes and the colors of the old uniforms of yesteryear. So basically what's being envisioned is you take Redskins off of everything and put either Washington or Commanders where it said Redskins, put the logos in. And I think it would be really cool. Be something that, is super awesome, that kind of ties into the past, but yet still keeps propelling this team forward. As Paul says, hey, it must be nice to have an owner, GM, head coach, players, personnel, scout for each individual. Scout for each individual for position. We have one guy that does it all, Jerry the Idiot Jones, right? And I'll tell you what, we're going to talk about it later tonight in our last segment called Which Coach. But that's such a challenging thing, right? And it was interesting. I forget who it was. TJ Houshmandzadeh the other day on, I guess it was one of the FX shows, said, basically that going to coach in Dallas is a career killer. So that, he gave like 5 examples of great coaches that when they went to Dallas and did good, did average, did poor, whatever, they never got another coaching job again. And he listed like 4 or 5 of them, and it kind of made you think, right? That like, puts a lot of credibility to what Paul said down there, about our good buddy, Jerry Jones, and the operation that he runs down there in Dallas. Right. But we don't have to worry about that up here because ding, 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 we have AP, good old Adam Peters as our GM. And he actually said this, I guess it was like a day or two after the NFC Championship game, kind of around like last week's show. And he said, look, every year is different and every team's different. This is where we ended up this year, but every team starts again at the bottom. Once this season's over, we're 0-0, and every single day we're just going to have to try to get better. And he's exactly right, because one of the things we're going to talk about tonight is we have something like, and we're going to break it down, like 25 free agents off of this year's roster. Now, look, they start with like 90 in training camp or some ungodly number, right? And by the time you get to preseason, actually right before or right through preseason, you have to whittle it down to the official 53-man roster. Actually, technically 54, counting the emergency quarterback. But, we're going to look at that. But one of the things that is so weird is, he's absolutely right. You basically start over at the beginning of the league year, or after your team finishes, playing in the playoffs or at the end of their regular season, and you're already working to construct that team for next season. So you kind of have to put everything that happened this season in the rearview mirror, focus on signing guys, look at the draft, do your position evaluations, at the Senior Bowl, the East-West Shrine game, and the Combine, pro days, the whole 9 yards, right? So these guys are going to be super busy. This is kind of like their busy time of year, not really during the season. It's kind of like after the season, right? Which is going to be super exciting to see how Adam Peters cooks. Eileen chimes back. She says, yep, being a Giants fan is tough. I never saw a Super Bowl win in my life. Well, for what it's worth, I remember the Super Bowl win by the Redskins in 91 when they beat the Buffalo Bills. I don't specifically remember the one in 87 because I was only like 7 years old at the time, or any of those, but I do remember one. So at least I got that going under my belt. And you probably weren't around when Broadway Joe won one for the New York Jets way back when. So I empathize with you for not being a Super Bowl in your life. I hope to see one that I can remember and enjoy as an adult. Hopefully we're on our way there. Paul says, hey, the last coach that was relative was Jimmy Johnson, and he was ran out after winning 2 championships. Man, there's truth in that, right, brother? Whether it was Jimmy Johnson, whether it was Barry Switzer, whether it was Wade Phillips, whether it was, let's be honest, Mike McCarthy. The dude went like 12 wins every year, and he still got ran out, right? Good, bad, or indifferent. So it's whatever Jerry wants down there in that Big D. Wow. Such a volatile and dynamic situation down there in Dallas, of coaches versus the owner. And I'm so glad we don't have that here in DC. We actually have something stable. We have something to build on, something that's been, pretty much somewhat successful, right? That we can go to. Speaking of go to, we're going to go into our season review, right? It's not going to be long, not going to be drawn out and, talking about 10,000 things. But we're just kind of going to overview what we did well, grade some stuff, pull out some key things, and then kind of go into like what we're going to do to help put, as I said, that 53-man roster back together. Washington finished the regular season at 12-5 with basically a .706 winning percentage. The kind of things that kind of stuck out to me was, hey, we had a 5-game winning streak in that season. Pretty awesome for some of the games that we lost. Look, we had a 3-game skid against the Steelers, the Ravens, and another team in there, which I can't remember off the top of my head. We're going to talk about it here in a second. The two things that kind of blew me away, so to speak, we were 5-3 on away games. So, we were better in the win column than we were in the loss on away games. Always good to know, always good to have under your belt. We were 7-2 at home, which I can't remember the last time that we were 7-2 at home, or at least that big of a win-loss ratio at home at Northwest, former FedEx Stadium in Landover, Maryland, right? Something that's kind of pretty cool to see. Obviously, we know the Eagles finished at 14-3 at the top of the division. Cowboys were 7-10. Giants were 3-14. But as we said, everybody after this coming Sunday goes back to 0-0. We have a hard schedule. We're going to talk about that coming up towards the end of the show. And our whole division has a hard schedule. And, we're going to compare all of that together at the end of the show. So towards the end of the show, it's going to be really interesting to see what happens next season as we look to build on that tremendous instant success that we had with our rookie quarterback this past season. Hey, look, here's the deal. We started off the season, and in all honesty, whether it was social media, whether it was national media, team insiders, diehard fans like myself, nobody expected us to go 12-5. Nobody expected us really to finish and qualify for the wild card spot, much less go to the NFC Championship game. So it's kind of all just icing on the cake, right? And when we start out the season, we had to travel to Tampa Bay, ended up going 0-1 week 1, lost to the Buccaneers 37-20. But, as we know, when we get to the playoffs, we'd have that revenge against the Buccaneers. We'll talk about that in a couple minutes. Week 2 of the season, we kind of started to do what we needed to do. May not have been pretty, may not have been a lot, but we kind of started beating the teams that we needed to beat that we haven't been able to do for the last 10, 15 years every game, right? Or every season, right? And we should have beat the Giants. We did beat the Giants. It was 21-18. Wasn't very pretty, but it took us to 1-1. Turned around and went to the Bengals for a primetime game, beat the Bengals 38-33 in week 3. Week 4, we traveled out west to Arizona, hostile environment, one of the loudest stadiums in the NFL. They actually did hold one of the records, like most false starts in NFL history. They keep a little running ticker up in the corner of their stadium so that every time an opponent has a false start, they just add it to it like an electronic clock. And I remember when I was out there a couple of years ago, it was already like really high, and I imagine they keep doing that. But we were able to beat the Cardinals pretty handedly, with Marvin Harrison Jr., McBride, who wasn't necessarily into his form yet, and Kyler Murray. We beat them 42-14. Next, we kind of did what we needed to do, took care of the Browns and Deshaun Watson, 34-13. Then came our tough stretch, right? We knew this was going to be a hard stretch for the Commanders going into the season where, look, we're going to have to play some arguably playoff contending, Super Bowl contending teams. And we started that off with a 23-30 loss to the Baltimore Ravens, bounced back pretty good in another game. Hey, look, you got to win this game. You should win this game. We did win this game 40-7 against the Carolina Panthers. Probably the turning point in the season for both of these teams came on a Thursday night game against the Chicago Bears with that infamous Hail Mary when Stevenson, the cornerback for the Bears, wasn't even paying attention and, had the Hail Mary pass on him. They completed it and, kind of the rest of the season was history, right? But we ended up winning 18-15 over the Chicago Bears. The following week, we traveled to MetLife Stadium, beat the Giants again for the season sweep, 27-22. And this is where it kind of gets a little tricky, right? And we had our 3-game losing skid that, we lost to the Steelers by 1 point, turned around on a short week, went to the Eagles, lost to them by 8 points, 18-26. Then had probably one of our worst losses, arguably of the season, against the Cowboys at home, 34-26, but then bounced right back and beat the Tennessee Titans 42-19 on December 1st. Almost lost the game due to a clock malfunction, mishap, whatever you want to throw in there, to the New Orleans Saints 20-19. And then we turned around and bounced the Eagles by 3 to 36-33 on December 22nd. With only two games remaining in the season, we then beat the Atlanta Falcons 30-24, and then finished off the Cowboys 23-19 as our final Week 18 game on January 5th. Good enough to qualify for the playoffs as a wild card team. Oh, by the way, who did we have up first? And that would be the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Unbeknownst to the world, big underdog going into the playoffs. We were able to get rid of the Buccaneers 23-20 with an upset, but I don't think the upset came until the divisional round when we basically manhandled and via turnovers beat the Detroit Lions, the number 1 seed, 45-31 in Detroit. Our steam, our turnover ratio, our cohesion between all 3 units just didn't come together in the NFC Championship where we got basically blown out 55-23. But it gives us a lot to hang our hats on. It gives us a lot to learn going into the next season and off season. And, it just gives us a lot to do. Gives us a lot of work, shows us the positions that we need and the holes we have to fill, the guys that we should or should not re-sign, that are free agents this year. The nice thing about AP was he didn't sign everybody to 1-year contracts last year. He sprinkled a couple 3 years, sprinkled a couple 2 years, and then had a couple 1-year deals, right? And then you take the guys that were already on the team and carried over, who some of them are expiring at the end of this season, and it kind of goes from there, right? But one of the things that we look at when we talk about this season is kind of, a grade that we would give every position group. I know that certain reporters and insiders and fans are definitely harder on certain position groups than others, and even including myself for certain things. But you got to try to be objective and look at the big picture and the bulk of work that each position group did, right? So obviously, starting with quarterback, Jaden Daniels, Marcus Mariota, you got to give them an A, right? Obviously, 90% of the season was JD5, did phenomenally well, even all the way up to the NFC Championship game. The kid's a rookie, learned a lot, progressed a lot, matured a lot, and even in the games where he got hurt or we were leading by a lot or equipment malfunctions, whatever, Mariota came in and did exemplary, right? It's going to be interesting to see if Mariota stays. We're going to talk about that in a couple minutes, but the quarterback group gets an A. Running backs. Some guys will grade the running backs really low. Like I'm talking like in the D range for this season. But I don't know if I'm going to really go that deep yet. I'll give them like a C to a C minus. And the reason I say that is, look, a couple of the guys cycled through out of games for injuries, onto the injured reserve, and off for the mandatory 4 weeks, that whole 9 yards. We had games where we were really good, productive with the run game, and then games where we had fumbles, we had guys that weren't hitting holes, weren't being explosive, didn't look like we're, a number 1, number 2 running back on a team, right? So I think if you collectively put all that together, you're going to get average at best. I don't see, the D's or the failings. I definitely wouldn't go as high as to give them a B of any kind. So I'll stick with a C, C minus. But there's guys definitely an area that we can improve. But it's definitely, kind of low on the chopping block for needs of what we have at this time, right? So, kind of is what it is. Wide receiver, look, we had Terry McLaurin, career year for that guy. Even though we don't have a true, number 2, an elite wide receiving core, like, a good 1-2 punch like other teams do, not only in our division, but our conference or even in the AFC. But the guys did really well. I think if you can find a solid number 2 or even a possibly number 1 that makes Terry an exceptional number 2, then it's even just money, right? Just extra icing on that cake for Jaden. But, I'd give our wide receivers a B. The only reason I give them a B and probably not an A or, or not even a C, look, they produced with JD5. They were able to run routes, but we had a lot of drop passes. We had a lot of, timing, bad routes, trying to figure out where to sit in those zones with Jaden. Yes, it's a rookie quarterback, so some of the blame does go on him as well. But then there were a lot of games where we weren't getting the releases off the line. We weren't creating space. We weren't, running those routes as crisp and clear to be open as what we could have for our rookie quarterback. So they get a B. Tight ends, Zach Ertz did a phenomenal job. John Bates did a great job. And even rookie Ben Sinnott, who's coming along, didn't necessarily be as productive as what many thought he was going to be. I'd give him a B, B+. Offensive line, a lot of guys are knocking on these guys in the D range. Man, I'll give these guys a C. They went through a lot. Sam Cosmi tore his ACL out for the end of the season. Big miss at the end of the playoffs for us. We had a rookie, Coleman playing left tackle, trying to protect that blind side for JD. And a mixed match of young guys and veterans across the line. If we can solidify that, add a couple players for depth, maybe even draft some good guys in there, that grade can only get up. The D line is kind of the same way. Look, John Allen and Payne, the 2 stalwarts. We got a rookie in there who did really well, Newton. But overall, those guys were kind of around like the D, maybe a C minus. as a collective unit for defense, we were able to get our defense from 32nd in 23 all the way up to 15 this past season. So there was a lot of improvement. I think a lot of that was some of the new players coming in on defense in free agency, the rookie stud in Sanders still that we drafted out of Michigan, and even the late season pickup to Lattimore to some extent in some of the late games where he was super effective when he wasn't injured. And, yes, there were games that he's basically picked on and gave up, some yards and productivity, Tampa Bay, Philadelphia. But, there are other games that he wasn't targeted at all when he was on the field. So it'll be really awesome to see him at 100% when he's not injured next season. Linebackers were solid. Give him a B. DB, Swiss cheese. Give him a D. Special teams was a B. They played, other than one game, maybe two. They did really well, especially with the new kickoff and return rules that they had to deal with. Kicking woes we went through all year. I think we went through 4 kickers altogether. Tressway, solid guy. I think he only had to punt in like a third of the games or something crazy like that. It's pretty crazy. And then, of course, look, you got to give your tip of the hat to the coaching staff, which I think has got to be a B at least between Dan Quinn, Cliff Kingsbury, and Joe Witt, and special teams as well. So, quick rundown, down and dirty grading, for where things are. As far as the rookie class that came out, look, we all know what Jaden Daniels did, who he was, his production, all that 9 yards. So we're not even going to talk about the number 2 overall pick. Number 36, we actually took Jerzon Newton, defensive lineman from Illinois. Provided great depth, even gave some good production. Second half of the season and even going into the playoffs, solid pickup and draft by Adam Peters and company. Number 50th overall pick, cornerback Mike Samerstill out of Michigan. Arguably should be in the nomination for Defensive Rookie of the Year, and he's not. Had some great interceptions, even though it wasn't his natural position to go out to, did really well with the adjustments that the coaching staff asked him to make. Solid pick. Ben Sinnott, another second-round pick at 53. Took advantage of some opportunities that he had. Wasn't necessarily quite where I think he needed to be for the first year. But, hey, look, when Zach Ertz basically has a career year with Jaden Daniels and John Bates, who basically can block really well but can't necessarily catch, is ahead of you, there's not going to be a whole lot of time for you to see the field. So maybe that increases going into next season. Maybe it doesn't. Brandon Coleman, the rookie offensive tackle out of TCU, did really well for his rookie season. First half of the season was basically lights out. Didn't allow many sacks at all. Minimal rushes. Did really great against some elite defensive pass rushers. Got hurt around the middle of the season. And I think that's kind of where his campaign in his rookie year started to decrease. Still held his own, but then ended up giving up, pressures, making mistakes, couple penalties here and there, blah, 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 blah. Third round pick, Luke McCaffrey, showed flashes of why he got drafted, why he's in the league as a third rounder. Is he going to be his brother? No. But he can still play a good role. He did really well on returns for the team, especially when Eckler was out. And I think he'll be around for a couple more years, at least through the end of his rookie contract. And we'll see what he can do in the couple of years to come. Linebacker Jordan McGee out of Temple did really well, especially, under the tutelage of Luvu and Bobby Wagner, especially with the dispatch of Jamin Davis and at the beginning of the season. So, I expect it, he may get replaced for another starter, but he could also be given more opportunity as that depth, provide depth and relief to the starting linebackers there in the middle. Dominique Hampton, I don't even know how much this dude played. He was a 5th round pick out of Washington for us. And I don't even know, it sounds bad, but I think he might have been practice squad only because I don't think he actually made the 53-man roster. And then 7th round pick was actually kind of surprising on the edge. Javonte Jean-Baptiste out of Notre Dame actually did really well for us. When look, I mean, we already had Fowler and Armstrong on the outsides, but, once again, a good rotational guy who made the most out of his opportunities when he did get the chance to play. And, I think he's going to be kept for a couple more years, at least on his rookie deal, to kind of get him developed. If we can partner him up with another, prolific edge rusher to learn from and develop, I think he's going to be doing great with, with nothing to really worry about, so to speak, as next season comes to fruition, right? Before we go on in our show tonight, the second half of tonight's show is brought to you by Jason Fine, aka Attorney Big Al. You can reach Attorney Big Al at 1-800-HURT-123. Jason Fine, Big Al, specializes in motor vehicle accidents, slips and falls, workers' compensation, personal injury claims, with 3 convenient office locations throughout Pennsylvania and New Jersey, with one located in Philadelphia, PA, one in Cherry Hill, New Jersey, and one in Pittsburgh, PA. Tell him you saw his ad here at Out of the Box Sports. Feel free to reach out to him for all of your legal needs and legal representation. Remember, if you don't win, he doesn't collect. So give Jason Fine, aka Attorney Big Al, a call at 1-800-HURT-123. All right, as we go into the second half of tonight's show, we're going to hit real quick on some personnel news. So personnel news isn't necessarily about our key players, so to speak, but more so the coaching cycles that have been going around the NFL here recently, right? To try and fill the 8 voids that were going on. So we know that Cliff Kingsbury kind of restricted access, and the team did too, to what opportunities were going to be available to him to interview for. The NFL kind of restricts that as well, based off the fact of how long your team is playing in the postseason. So it kind of goes hand in hand. Cliff Kingsbury actually removed his name from the New Orleans Saints head coaching cycle search, which is more than likely going to be going to Kellen Moore, offensive coordinator of the Philadelphia Eagles. But stranger things have happened, right? Speaking of permissions and movements, there was a tentative agreement for assistant GM Lance Newmark, who Adam Peters actually brought in from Detroit as kind of like the salary cap specialist, to go to New York Jets to be their GM. Apparently, there was a breakdown in contract talks and finalization and compensation. So he is actually back in Washington as the assistant GM of the Washington Commanders. Basically never left, right? But one of the guys who did garner a lot of interest, whether it's as offensive coordinator, whether it's as a pass game coordinator, or as an equivalent quarterbacks coach in other teams, was David Blau. So Blau was actually blocked from talking to the Jacksonville Jaguars about their quarterbacks coaching position, and Chicago about its passing game coordinator. So Washington puts a lot of respect and high value on David. He worked really well with Kingsbury and Daniels this year. So that whole trifecta, I think they wanted to keep together to be consistent for the rookie going into year 2, and not have, one of those 2 major pieces to Jaden's offensive puzzle be disrupted. So I give him a lot of credit for that, that they were able to basically, kind of block that and keep Dave from going somewhere else. Not to say that he would have, but, when you start getting interviews and requests and everything like that, then, eventually the writing is on the wall that you're going to start losing assistant coaches and coordinators to other teams and franchises, which is actually one thing that we did. We lost our assistant special teams coordinator. I forget his name, to be honest with you, off the top of my head, who actually had connections to Pete Carroll when they were together in Seattle. As you know, Pete Carroll was hired by the Las Vegas Raiders to be their head coach. And with that working network and connection, the assistant special teams coordinator went to the Las Vegas Raiders to be their special teams coordinator out there with Pete Carroll. But lo and behold, one of the breaking news as of like 3 hours ago, well, maybe 4 now, the Washington Commanders actually hired former 49ers special teams coordinator Joe Schneider. I think it's John. Let me make sure. Brian Schneider as the assistant special teams coordinator for the Washington Commanders. So once again, it kind of goes back to that, networks, coaching cycles, team cycles. Why is that significant? Adam Peters used to be the assistant GM out in San Francisco. Knows Schneider from his time out there. Brought him in laterally over here to fill that void and help provide that leadership on the special teams for the Commanders. So as quickly as one vacancy is created, it's filled by basically kind of like that lateral movement across the league, right? Makes sense? All right. Speaking of making sense, I talked about it earlier in the show. Hey, look, going into this off season, let's talk about what Adam Peters has to work with and what he's going to be cooking up, right? We have the third most money to spend in free agency to the tune of $89 million. Let's also keep in mind that that's not truly $89 million. Why is it not truly $89 million? One, rookie class for 2025. On the average, it costs about $9 to $10 million for the incoming rookie class to basically, give them signing bonuses, roster bonuses, contracts, depending on the number of draft picks you have. We have 7 draft picks for the upcoming year, no 4th rounder and 3 7th rounders. And of course, now we're picking 29th overall versus, in the top 10, which is going to reduce the amount of spending that you're going to need on rookie contracts per the collective bargaining agreement, but that's all neither here nor there. So you kind of get it, right? As I said, we have a full draft pick allotment to use, 7 of them. Depending on if Adam Peters tries to package some of them in trades, whether it's draft day or for guys that have been announced for trades that we're going to talk about here in a second. And then, of course, we have tons of one-year veteran deals expiring. Speaking of veteran deals expiring, let's take a look at some of those contracts that are expiring. It's kind of a little hard to see, so we're going to run down the list of the players that we're looking at here, right? And we're going to talk about real quick some of the ones that we should sign, some of the ones we're not going to sign, right? Starting off with Bobby Wagner. Bobby Wagner, this says he counted for $6.5 million. Unfortunately, I won't say unfortunately, the guy earned it, right? Because he was a stud in the middle. He actually got a bunch of incentives, which actually put him closer to $8 million against the cap for his payroll this year. I think he's definitely got to get re-signed, whether it's 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, definitely got to re-sign him. There's definitely some rumor speculation that there could be a reunion out in Las Vegas with his former head coach, Pete Carroll. Unfortunately, I don't see that happening. Why? Bobby's kind of a man of doesn't necessarily like change, so to speak. He actually represents himself. He's been doing this for a couple seasons now. Doesn't have an agent. But he truly enjoyed being on the Washington Commanders this year, not just with the rookie quarterback, Jaden Daniels, but the fact of instant success that they had as well. So even though the partnership and the friendship between him and Pete Carroll might be really deep, I don't see him only being a one and done here in Washington, giving up the chance to possibly go to the NFC Championship game again next year and even maybe the Super Bowl to a team that doesn't even know who their quarterback is. Just hired an offensive coordinator and defensive coordinator in the last 24 hours. Is probably not even going to get out of third place in the AFC West. So kind of see the writing on the wall. He's going to be there, right? Marcus Mariota, look, solid backup quarterback. He's going to garner interest from teams around the league that, are going to need a starting quarterback. So he may or may not be on a team come free agency time, 50-50, right? Love to have him back, but more than likely he probably won't be returning. Jeremy Chin, definitely got to re-sign the guy. KJ Osborne, wide receiver. We picked him up midway through actually like 2/3 of the way through the season. I just think there's something better out there. He's probably going to walk. Clelin Ferrell, look, unless we don't get better at the edge, re-sign him. If we do, he's a liability. He's gone. Tress Wade, got to sign the punter. Dante Fowler Jr. on the edge. Definitely got to re-sign him. Michael Davis, cornerback. He's actually been one of the better cornerbacks, even though we haven't had the best secondary this season. Better than St. Jude's, better in some ways. And we're going to talk about him here in a minute. Noah Igbenati. There's 2 are kind of like interchangeable, so to speak. One of them's going to stay. I don't think both of them are going to be here come next season, especially with how well Sanders still did at cornerback, even though he's technically a safety, and kind of go that route. But, hey, whatever. We'll see what happens, right? Next on the list, it's kind of funny he's next on the list. We'll bring this comment up. He actually commented earlier, but I was going to wait until we talk about him. Spencer says, hey, how do you feel about losing a veteran Zach Ertz to retirement? Funny thing is, Zach Ertz didn't retire today. Don't know the news source. Haven't seen anything on social media about it other than one Philadelphia blog. I don't want to say blog, sports show dropping that down about Zach Ertz retirement. There was talk and people read way too far into his NFC Championship game presser. But when he did his exit interview with media in team headquarters in Ashburn last week, he hinted at everything about coming back, especially if the Commanders would have him back. And I think Adam Peters will, especially for the work that he did with Jaden this year. Big numbers, yardage, catches, touchdowns, and being that safety blanket that Jaden has. So I don't see how they don't bring him back. He'll be back. Cornelius Lucas, left tackle. Depending on how we draft and maybe what's out there in free agency, he could be expendable in free agency. Michael Dieter, unfortunately, he's probably going to end up being gone unless maybe they keep him for depth for some reason. But I kind of feel like they're going to keep Lucas ahead of Dieter and kind of move some guys around. Trent Scott actually did really well as a fill-in in depth at right tackle, especially when Cosme went down. So I see them re-signing him to a team-friendly deal. Zacchaeus, I think, is probably one of the wide receivers that ends up coming back. He would come back ahead of KJ Osborne and maybe even Noah Brown and maybe even ahead of Crowder. Zacchaeus actually did really well for us this year. We still need that true number 2, and there's a lot of names you could throw out there and that would make sense for us, but it kind of is what it is. Benjamin St. Juice, I don't see him coming back. Maybe. Crowder, he did good on special teams, but just wasn't really. It's a crowded wide receiver room, right? And when you still have guys like Diami Brown and Noah Brown, the next 2 that you have to re-sign, you re-sign those 2, and you're still going out to try and get a number 2, whether through the draft or free agency. Then it becomes guys in that wide receiver room become expendable, right? Bellor, linebacker, has to be re-signed. Sheldon Day, I think he's going to be re-signed for depth, especially. Driscoll will be interesting because, hey, look, if Mariota leaves and gets that big payday to be a starting quarterback somewhere, then they're going to end up re-signing Driscoll to back up JD, if not coming with somebody else. We actually have Hartman to the futures reserve contract, so he'll definitely, at least be in training camp next year, and it'll be interesting. McNichols, I think they have to return, but then it also depends on how they figure out. They know they're going to shake up the running back room. It's just a matter of how, right? Eckler's on a deal. Brian Robinson Jr. is on a deal. So are they going to draft somebody? More than likely, yes. I don't necessarily see them going out and getting a running back in free agency, but who knows? Austin Seibert, he's going to be expendable. Unfortunately, Gonzalez was better than him coming down the home stretch, and I think it's just going to be the way it is, right? Following up the end of the list here, we talked about it. Zane Gonzalez will get re-signed. Holmes probably won't get re-signed. Walker, 50-50. Bates should, maybe. Depends. Other teams could be looking for tight ends. Bates is a decent tight end, really good blocker, average pass catcher, right? Kind of Chris Rodriguez should be re-signed, but then once again, that makes 4 running backs. Somebody's going to become expendable, right? Casimir Island is going to be expendable, and Nabusi is going to probably be expendable as well, unless they think he's going to be some kind of a depth guy for them. Real quick, look, everybody talks about the fact that, the Washington Commanders and the coaching staff start making the rounds during, the Senior Bowls and the Senior Bowl, the East-West Shrine game, and all that good stuff that's been taking place over the last 2 weeks. And of course, look, it's not necessarily interesting who, but the position groups that they're looking at or they talk to, because everybody talks to players and stuff like that. Kind of like it's a precursor to the combine and per days, right? So we know that, look, the team talked to NTN from Georgia, Neal from Kansas, Edwards from Michigan, and Allen from Syracuse. All 4 of those guys collectively, running backs. They talked to Thomas from Florida State. They talked to Hill out of Nebraska, Porter out of Iowa State, and Riley from Louisville. Common denomination, they're all cornerbacks. 2 needs that we have on our team. More cornerback than running back, but it's nice to see they're talking, right? Talk to Beck, TCU, Felton, Maryland, Restrepo, Miami, Johnson out of Oregon. All 4 of those guys, wide receivers. Can they draft a guy that could be a possible number 2 behind Terry and fill in with Diami? Or, sign somebody like Higgins or Metcalf or somebody else in free agency? Who knows? We know that Ertz will probably come back, but we still, is Sanat going to be what Sanat was drafted to be late in the second round? I think they're kind of banking on Bates not returning because of free agency. So, hey, look, they talked to Arroyo, Fannin Jr., Lachey, and Taylor from Miami, Bowling Green, Iowa, and LSU, respectively. 4 decent, really good college tight ends. Where I think they're going to end up going at some point in time, first round, second round, they got to go in this direction. But they talked to Belton out of NC State, Ursery out of Minnesota, Jones out of LSU, and Milam out of West Virginia. Big, beefy, good offensive tackles. I wouldn't be surprised if they try to find somebody that can be better than Coleman at left tackle and then slide him in to play his natural position of guard. So, definitely some good stuff going on there, right? Last two things that we talk about before we wrap up tonight's show is schedules for 2025. It's really interesting. I think I've shown this a couple times ago when it first came out. And for the most part, other than 3 games, this is consistent across all 3, actually technically all 4 NFC East teams. Why do I say that? Whether it's home or away, sometimes it's different for each NFC East team. The NFC East plays each other twice, 6 games to comprise of their 17-game schedule, right? But then we also have what is going to amount to, and we're going to break it down here, the hardest schedules in the NFL for next year. Why? Because the NFC East plays the AFC West, Kansas City, Denver, LA Chargers, and Las Vegas Raiders. And then we also get to play the NFC North, Detroit Lions, Chicago Bears, Green Bay Packers, and the Minnesota Vikings. 2 of arguably the best divisions in the NFL. So, and then by virtue of the Washington Commanders finishing second this past season, we also get to pick up the Seattle Seahawks, second place in the NFC West, Miami Dolphins, second place in the AFC East, and the Atlanta Falcons, second place in the NFC South. So, on paper, depending on, we haven't even put a roster together yet. We have to put a half a team together. It's a pretty tough to decent schedule. Didn't necessarily really know how tough until you look at the winning percentages of the teams that you played against or playing against based off of this year's finishes. Let me break it down for you. Number 1, hardest schedule based off most difficult schedule out of the 32 teams in the NFL for next season is actually the New York Giants with an opposing winning percentage of 57.574. So 57% winning percentage, right? Followed by a tie at number 2 for Chicago and Detroit. By the way, both teams that we have to play, along with the first place team, the New York Giants. Kind of see where I'm going here? All right, number 4 with the hardest schedule is Philadelphia. By virtue of finishing first in the NFC East, their 3 remaining games are first place teams in other divisions. So not only are they playing the AFC West and the NFC North like us, but they're also playing 3 other first place teams from this year. Number 5, tie for 5, is actually between Dallas, Green Bay, and Minnesota. All 3 teams that we have to play next year, one of which is also in our division. And then coming in at number 8 is our beloved Washington Commanders with the 8th most difficult schedule at a 55% opposing winning percentage, followed by Baltimore at number 9 and Pittsburgh at number 10. So it just goes to show that the NFC East has arguably, the NFC East and NFC North have arguably the hardest schedules of difficulty based off of opponents' winning percentage of this year for the 2025-26 season for next year. So definitely we have our work cut out for us next year. Be interesting to see how we do. We're going to win. We're going to have tight games. We're going to win. We're going to need to win the games that we need to win against average to below average teams. And quite honestly, there very well could be, on paper, not very bad teams next year in our schedule. So it's going to make for some really interesting football, really exciting football. Wouldn't be surprised if we have a lot of games that come down to the last 2 minutes of the football game as we try to have an equal record to what we did this season, if not another game better, right? And as we always do here at Out of the Box Sports, we try to end the program on kind of a lighter note, talk some trash about other teams, and, just kind of have a little lighthearted moment before we sign off. And of course, we're going to do that tonight, right? Something kind of cool that I saw on social media a couple days ago. I guess it was, so we're Sunday. So these are the new coaching hires. And of course, that's just a fill in for the New Orleans Saints because it hasn't been officially announced yet down there in that bottom box. But the category and the caption for this graphic was, which new head coach will be fired first? In all honesty, when you look at this, there's a lot of good, I'll say 3 out of 5 or 3 out of 7, because we don't know who the Saints are head coaching is yet, even though it's more than likely going to be Kellen Moore. That, you got to think that 4 of these dudes are not going to get fired first, right? Let's rattle them off. Mike Vrabel for the New England Patriots, Pete Carroll for the Las Vegas Raiders, Aaron Glenn for the Jets, and Ben Johnson for the Bears. So what does that leave us? That leaves us Liam Cohen, who looks like a complete dork, for the Jacksonville Jaguars. Whoever is going to be the coach of the New Orleans Saints, with that debacle going on down there now, both on the field and off the field. If you don't know what I mean by off the field, just Google it. You'll read about it. Pretty discouraging. And then, of course, our beloved NFC East counterparts, the Dallas Cowboys of Brian Schottenheimer. So my guess is it's going to come down to Schottenheimer, Cohen, or whoever the New Orleans Saints pick as head coach. With that being said, if I go off of strictly appearances and resume alone, it's going to be Cohen from the Jacksonville Jaguars. However, knowing how much our good, beloved divisional owner, Jerry Jones, loves to meddle in things, it would not surprise me if Schottenheimer is gone before Cohen. So look at the list. Feel free to chime in. Tell me what you think. Which coach is going to be fired first off that list? Coaching deals for those guys range anywhere from 3 years to, I think it was 3 years to 5 years. I don't think anybody had a bigger than a 5-year deal on that list, with 3 being the shortest. So could be sooner, could be gone. I mean, hey, look, we used to think that one and dones were never going to happen in the NFL, that you always kind of had 2 years, maybe 3 years to prove yourself, and then the management would can you. But we've seen in recent history over the last 5 or 6 years that, that is quite possible that you could be one and done. So, hey, hopefully your team's not on here. If they are, hopefully you're not the first one to go. Speaking of going, I'm not sure when, quite honestly, our next show of Commander's Gridiron is going to be. We might do a show next week, just as a super short one, not even an hour, since we aren't going to have as much to talk about, much to review. We might be in a little bit of trade news, depending on what happens, with the Myles Garrett situation, the Cooper Kupp situation, if there's any other freaky trades that might take course over the next week. So we might do a quick show next week, talk about the Super Bowl maybe a little bit, see if there's some more off the field stuff, and stuff like that. Might only be a half hour long. We might even try and get a guest just to banter back and forth about the season. Who knows? And then after that, we're probably only going to go to once a month until like the combine. Then we'll do a show, and then free agency, we might do a show. And of course, leading up to the draft and right after the draft, that kind of deal, right? So kind of just watch the social media at our handles there, as well as at Out of the Box Sports, to see when you can catch our next show. Shows will always be at 8:30 p.m. Next week, we'll probably do one at 8:30, just kind of keep it going. And then we'll go into our semi-annual or semi-weekly wraps after the Super Bowl. So if you would, be a friend, tell a friend, give us a like, give us a subscribe at Out of the Box Sports, where you're watching the show tonight. Speaking of Out of the Box Sports, if you'd like to have a show, host a show, talk about a show, anybody can sit here behind a microphone and blabber for an hour. Feel free to reach out to Paul Spencer and myself. We'll get you hooked up, get you started, get you a slot, get you a date where you can sit here and talk about your favorite team. Doesn't have to be about football. It can be about anything, any sport. We have wrestling. We have college football, baseball, basketball, hockey. We got it all. We're always looking for new content, new shows, new creators. So feel free to reach out if you so choose. With that being said, we'll look forward to an abbreviated show next Tuesday at 8:30 p.m. Until then, have a good night.